Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of What Sold on eBay. This one is really fresh. In fact, all of the packages are sitting waiting for me to take them to the post office, and it's quite a pile because 18 out of 20 items sold this last flight. It was supposed to be the April edition, but we didn't actually get to sell the items until May. So literally, they just closed and are just now ready to go. So you're getting this information as fresh can be. Now, we do this as an experiment to see what is happening in the market, see what's happening on eBay. I put these items on auction. This last time, because I was traveling to do an estate sale in Spokane, I couldn't do any buy it nows because I had to wait until I came back to be able to ship. And so all of these things just had to play out. And so we definitely got a view for what these things would sell for if you gave them 10 days at auction and they had plenty of time. I am very grateful to my level 2 and level 3 members who get to have early access to these eBay listing videos when they come out. So they see the things first, and then everybody else gets to see them a few days later. I do admit that that does help with the sales. I had someone say, well, gee, you're selling so much to your own customers now that definitely is helping your sales. And I would say that there's some truth to that at this point. I looked and I would say that probably half of the items we sold went to repeat buyers. And so I appreciate that very much too. I'm glad that I'm finding things that people are interested in seeing. Now, the first item I'm going to show you here is one piece that did not sell. This I thought was a really lovely piece. It's rather a specific piece, and I guess that, do you need a stained glass window? Well, it's maybe more about having a perfect place for it and wanting to hang it, or having a perfect person to give it to in this case, because you would certainly think that an Anglophile would really enjoy this. It is Victoria Tower, built in the 1860s, but the stained glass looks more like an 1890s piece with the screen printed Victoria Tower in the center and that Art Nouveau design around it. I still think it's wonderful. I'm going to take it to shows and I think it will sell there. But it is a large and harder to ship thing. And I did a lot of large and harder to ship things this month. That was deliberate. I wanted to see whether we have enough of a market now and whether people would in fact go for bigger things in spite of the fact that they cost more to ship. And I was pleasantly surprised to find out that yes, they do. So we'll take a look at that. Now, this was easy to ship. And this is an old shirt that I had from when I worked a temporary job at a clothing store in Seattle around the time that Hypercolor was the big thing. And this company did a line called Schizo Color. So this has actually been sitting in my closet for a very long time, and it's now going off to live with someone else. The only part that changes color is the orange part, and I think that's the reason it didn't go for a higher price, because I know some of the Hypercolor can be selling for $30 and $40 now. This one went for the opening bid of $9.99, and let's see, there I am wearing it. And you can see where the heat activation is changing the color on the orange part of the background there. So I thought that was kind of neat. The other thing was it wasn't really clear to people in my listing. I'm not sure how I could have made it more so, what it looked like when it was actually heat activated, and this is it. So it was a fun thing to have for a long time, and it's time for it to go to someone else, and I'm glad they're getting it. This, on the other hand, did better than I expected. This is William Holden, and this autograph, this was an example of something that really just should have gone on eBay way back when in the first place. I've had this, I've taken it to shows, I've had it in a mall space, but when you have something that is specific to a movie star, a celebrity, a sports figure, the collectors for that are going to be very serious, but they could be spread out anywhere in the country. And eBay is definitely a great way to reach anybody in the country. So this went for $31.50, which is more than I had it for sale at when I had it at the shows. And I was really pleased that it sold, because the signature there, it will hold up much better under someone's normal house lights than under fluorescent lights at a show. Fluorescent lights do tend to drain things of color and they fade signatures. Fluorescent light is just not really great. So I'm glad that this is going to a nice, safe place. And yes, he was certainly rakish then. Now, this was the big sale of the month, and I was so pleased because a friend of mine found this at a thrift store. She really could use the money, and she said, "Oh, I think it's pretty good, but can you do any research and tell me?" And when I told her, "Oh, yeah, this guy's a big deal," she said, "Oh, please let's sell it." And so I'm so pleased for her that it went so well. It went for $623 on 16 bids. This is a Troy Laner necklace, and he was a Navajo silversmith. He was one of the last ones who sold through the pawn shops and through the galleries in Shiprock and Gallup, New Mexico, where he was from. And he did not have his own gallery, and he didn't produce a lot because a lot of what he did was double layered and then cut through and then yellowed to make the black coloration so that you would get this dimension. And it was really difficult to do and a lot of work. We can see his signature on the back of the other picture here. So if you see Laner, this is a particularly good sterling maker from the Navajo region. This I was pleased with as well. I think these are actually kind of hard to find. They're from the 1930s. They're right about the time Prohibition is listed, and this is Verner's. Verner's is a national brand now, but back in the day, it was really only known in the Detroit area and the maybe southern Michigan, northwest Ohio, northeast Indiana area. And so these were not really very common. I got this at a flea market for only $2, and it was dirty as could be, but I knew right away that it was good because it was very thin. And of course, we're looking at Depression era and Prohibition era, and these advertising pieces were made on very thin pieces of glass. So we packed it really well. It got a much bigger box than you would usually use for a piece that size. It went for $20.50, and it actually had several bids. This was one of the large items I wasn't sure was going to sell, and it only went for the opening bid right about $100, which is a pretty good deal, but the shipping is another $50, and at $150, which is what the person who bought it actually paid for it, you're getting into the retail value. So I knew that we were possibly not going to get as much for it as we would get if we left it out in a mall and took our time and waited for it. But I really wanted to see if there was a customer who was willing to take a chance on having a large item like this shipped. All of these are pieced together. And so there's all sorts of different marbles. Marble was inexpensive in the Depression era, so they could do this sort of work. But it means you have to be careful shipping it because this is all glued together and formed, and you want to make sure that it's going to get there in one piece. I put a ton of padding underneath this and actually laid it flat in a big box so that there wouldn't be any torquing or moving of the figure on top of it. So hopefully it gets there just fine. We're going to take it in to ship today. It's a beautiful piece, though. I mean, look at the detail. The flying goose is definitely symbolic of a lot of things, including travel and freedom. It went for $99 on one bid. Again, it might have sold for more in another context. Maybe, sometimes big things do better if you put them in a retail store or take them to shows as opposed to putting them online. But I decided that I was willing to give it a shot, and I'm glad it found a new home. This piece also went for the opening bid of $99, and I think they got a pretty good deal. Again, I think this is probably worth $150, but it is a really interesting piece of Dresden china, and it is done on Royal Vienna style of painting. You can see one little factory flaw right in the bottom there. See that little dot next to the floral sprays, between the big floral spray and the small one. Well, Dresden primarily painted on seconds that they bought from the Meissen porcelain companies, and then they would do their own painting. They did this in the Royal Vienna style, and you'll see the mark on the back, which is from the mid-1890s, that indicates that. When I get down there, let me show you that. There's the mark, and you've got this gold floral cartouche, which is your Royal Vienna indication, as well as the Dresden mark. It also just has a Royal Vienna style with these various floral sprays, all of which are a little different, and it's a nice Rococo style where it is not the same. If you take a look at this side of the bowl, I'll show you the other side, and notice that the edging, it's not symmetrical. Everything is a little bit different. It's to give you lots of fancy high style. Rococo Revival was really big in the 1890s when this was made. I think it's just a beautiful piece, and I'm very excited that it found a new home. It's nice to see porcelain being respected again. A few years ago, I wouldn't have put this on eBay because I would have assumed that it just wouldn't sell for enough. So we're finally starting to see porcelain prices for really nice quality porcelain, Dresden and Meissen and things, have stabilized and are starting to improve. And I think that's a reflection of a new interest in fancier goods in the market and somewhat a reaction to this era that we live in now where everything is so streamlined and modern that there really isn't a lot of design. And so people looking for things with a lot of design are looking at antiques and vintage. The lot of Beatles trading cards. Well, I have a friend who deals in Beatles trading cards, and he said, "Well, I was your first bid, and someone else outbid me because he thought that maybe he could get them for cheap enough to resell them himself." But these went for a decent retail-ish price, $13.50. You know, it shows in stores they're usually selling for $4 to $6 each, and there's five of them. So by the time you put in the shipping, you know, the customer paid about retail price on them, and they got a nice collection. They were in good shape. They came out of a storage locker of a 73-year-old woman who was living in assisted living with her 103-year-old mother, and she decided that at this point they didn't need them anymore, so it was time for them to go to a new generation of Beatles fans. And boy, the Beatles are one of those bands that their stuff just never goes out of style. These are original from 1964, start of the British invasion, and you would have thought if it was a lesser band that people would have forgotten them, but no, the Beatles, they do just fine. I think they're going to have adherents for many decades to come. This is a very pretty piece, and I was glad to see it got 8 bids. It actually sold for a little bit more than I had expected. It went for $30 plus shipping. It's the Cheadle pattern, which is one of the better Royal Winton patterns, and we'll do a little bit of a close-up so that you can see the particular floral spray that makes this Cheadle as opposed to one of the other dozen or few dozen chintz pieces that Royal Winton made. They did a lot of chintz patterns before the Second World War, but they became really popular after the Second World War because the English had been kind of starved of anything with color during the war. Everything had to go to the war effort, and so you really couldn't get. Spoe made a line called an Imperial that was pure white because they couldn't do any decoration, so they had to form sculpted pieces that they could sell in pure white during the war years. So the war was over, people wanted to be happy and cheerful again, and this is certainly a happy, cheerful pattern. I've always liked the sandwich trays, and Royal Winton is always nicely marked, as you see on the back there. A fun piece, it went for the price it should, and I was happy that it actually got a lot of attention. Now, this piece did really well. I was very, very happy. It sold for $255 on 3 bids. It had gotten the opening bid, and I thought, honestly, it was only going to sell for the opening bid, and the opening bid was $150, which is what I actually paid for the piece. This is Barbini, and it's got a good label, as you can see there. This is Murano glass. This is from about 1980. This came in colors as well, and I was a little bit concerned that without color in it, that this might not fare well online, but it's such good quality glass, and it's so well made, and it is so substantial. This thing is huge and heavy. It's one of the heaviest things that I have shipped as far as a decorative object before. Now, I did ship an entire dining room set once, so I can't say it's the biggest thing I've ever sent, but it's definitely one of the biggest things I've sent recently. And I was really pleased that it got attention and that it got 3 bids and ended up selling for about $100 more than I paid for it. It was nice to make a little money because there was a lot of effort. This went in a huge box with a ton of padding, and the shipping alone actually cost me a little bit more than eBay's estimate, which was fine because I want to make sure it gets to that collector and that they are happy with it. This is such a great piece. It got 12 bids. It sold for right at what it should. $75 plus shipping is definitely a fair price to receive as a seller on this. The tip of the nose is in perfect condition. That's very important. And I even like where the blue splash on the face was. This variegated glaze where there's a little bit of blue mottled in with the green. It really depends on where it falls as to how it looks. Now, there's something about this that I learned in the process of listing this that I'll share with you, and that is that if you see a Royal Hager piece and the code number on the bottom is R something, it means he made the piece when he was their main designer in the 1930s. He came back and did a ton of designs for them in the 1950s, but he did it as a freelancer, and so they do not say R in the mold. So we know this is actually an older piece originally in a 1950s glaze, and I just love it. I'm looking for one of these for my house, but I'm looking for a little different color pattern. And if I find it, well, I'll be keeping that one. But this one was meant to go to someone else, and it did. It had 17 bids, so a whole lot of people thought that this was interesting. I started it at under $50, so I figured it would get a lot of attention. And that's a question sometimes as far as pricing strategy on eBay. Do you start it at a low price and let everybody get excited to try to get a lot of interest and have people notice it? Or do you start it closer to what you really want to get for it and be happy with maybe just getting that one bid that takes it off your hands? And I decided in this case that we would start it a little bit on the low side because I felt like there was higher demand for this sort of thing. The porcelain bowl that sold for opening bid of $100, demand isn't as high for that sort of thing, so that made more sense to start closer to what you need to get. This one, I figured we could let the market take it where it was going to go, and it sure did. Now, I had two Drurys items, and I thought that they might go to the same person, but they actually went to two different places. This one went to a collector, and this is the one where the Mountie in chalkware is sitting on top of the beer bottle, which is very peculiar and funny, and I thought lots of fun. I just thought he was really great. He had a little bit of damage on his hat, which is why I wanted to make sure I put this picture in. It's so important to give full disclosure because people are going to get things, and if they're not happy, you're just going to get it sent back. So don't play games. Just show them what it is and let the person who's bidding on it really have all the information they need, because they're going to get it and they're going to see it, and if they're not happy, well, then you're the one that's going to eat it. This went for $82 on 8 bids, and that's a pretty fair price for any of these chalk tavern figures that you see from the 1950s. I would definitely keep your eye out for these if you're out in the wild, because they do sell very well. This was the other one that we had. I actually talked about them together on the video that I showed when I put them out. This one is Sirocco wood. It has a little bit of crazing. I tried to represent that. I wanted to make sure it was very clear that it wasn't in perfect condition, but that it was solid, intact, and not damaged in any way. And I was so pleased because this ended up going to a huge brewery museum that is opening in Michigan. This guy has taken a former, I think it was a textile factory, somewhere, a town outside of Lansing, and he's turned it into a giant brew pub and beer museum. And this is going in the beer museum. And my friend Dave, who sells antique advertising and is from that area, was all excited because he sold this guy a bunch of stuff when he started the museum. I think it started last year. And I think they're open and operating now. And I was just really pleased to see that this is where it went. If you're in central Michigan and you happen to be interested in Breweriana, look for Brewery Museum Brew Pub. I believe part of it is now a hotel. He's just made a huge complex out of it. And it is supposed to be one of the best brewery museums in the country. And I'm so pleased that something that I found in Florida, of all places, has ended up there where people who really are interested in this kind of thing can enjoy it. Now, this was a twofer, and this was a situation where a viewer bought this item because she'd already bought another item that was going to be flat and large and need to be shipped, so it was easy to put this in. So she got it on the third bid. This is Ricky Nelson, or Rick Nelson, as he was in 1961 when this was put out. And he was the original teen idol. So this folio has all the information that you would possibly need to be a super fan. There he is in some sort of a martial arts class, I believe, with his brother. Just great graphics, Lots of interesting stuff. There we go. There's a good picture of him. And boy, he really was something in his time. He was the person who the term teen idol was coined for. And that TV show, boy, that launched his career. And, he died young, but I think he had a lot of fun. And I certainly hope so, because he certainly paid the price of stardom as well. This is the other piece that viewer bought, and I'm so excited because she wrote a lovely note to me saying that the reason that she was starting to collect World's Fair is that she'd seen my videos, and I'm so enthused about World's Fair that she started reading about World's Fairs and has become enthused and wants to collect things herself. And that just did my heart good, because World's Fairs, growing up in Seattle where there were two World's Fairs, one was at the University of Washington campus where I went to college, and the other one was where the Space Needle is. So there was just always this feeling that, oh, World's Fairs really brought this city to prominence. And so I always have been interested in them. Chicago also had two World's Fairs, and in 1933, part of the World's Fair was to rebuild part of Fort Dearborn, the original fort that was to protect Chicago, although it actually was mostly sacked by the Native Americans in the area. So I guess it didn't work too effectively. But Chicago was celebrating its centenary as an incorporated city, and they had the World's Fair. And this tray, a service tray, would have been very useful to people in the 1930s because people got radios in the 20s and 30s. And so the idea of sitting in front of the radio and having a snack or doing your work, as opposed to sitting at a dining room table. Well, that was a new concept. Now it seems like everybody just eats on the couch, and the couch has tables that flip up, and you just don't actually leave the couch, and nobody uses the dining room anymore. But back then, this was a pretty new concept. So trays were something that people could use. Yes, somebody schlepped this big silhouette tray around the World's Fair. I just thought it was a neat piece, and I'm glad that it went to somebody who is a fledgling collector of World's Fairs. I think it's a great piece. 33 Chicago is one of my favorite World's Fairs to collect because of the Art Deco influence, but this is a neat piece too. Brooklyn Models turned out to have a more interesting history than I realized, and they make very good stuff, but, die-cast cars, there's just a lot of them right now. So the fact that this only went for the opening bid of $9.99 didn't really hurt my feelings. This is a Tucker. It's one of the first things they ever made, but they've made several versions of it, and this version with the New York liner is 1980s, which means this was actually made about the time they moved the production back to England from Canada, where they started. The Canadian versions are worth more. If I had the Canadian version, this might have sold for many multiples of $9.99, but it went for $9.99 on one bid, and someone is definitely going to enjoy it. It's like new original packaging. I mean, it's got everything. So, and the Tucker was such a great car. Oh my goodness. This piece went for $45. Now, if this piece was any other color, I would have expected more, but actually in the milk glass, which was produced later by the Phoenix Company, $45 is a perfectly fair price to get, and it went on 3 bids, and I'm very glad that it's going to a collector. I believe this is actually going to somebody who watches the channel. You can see it there with the background, and here it is with the background cut out. I tried to do both so that people could really get a feel for the color of this, because it's sort of a grayish cast of milk glass, and that's why we know Phoenix did this about 1960. Many companies have owned the molds to this. Consolidated came up with this in the 1920s. It's called Line 700. It's an interesting combination of Art Deco and sculpted glass with floral patterning. And Consolidated originally did it not in solid colors, but as a clear with a colored wash. So the color just sort of picks up in certain places the peaks and valleys of the piece. And it's a neat look. Phoenix was more into doing milk glass and then painting on top of that, or custard glass, or those sorts of things. And so the Phoenix look is a little bit different. Ultimately, Pilgrim Glass was the last company I know of to have made this line, They did it in their colors, cranberry and black and things like that. And who knows where the molds went after Pilgrim closed. My guess is that they're still out there somewhere, and this may actually end up being reintroduced in new colors by some other company at some point. Glass molds tend to do that if it's an interesting line, and this definitely is an interesting line. It's very deco, but with a little bit of Art Nouveau influence. I was glad that it sold for the price it should. This went to a viewer who I really enjoy, and I'm so excited that she got it. It's Doña Rosa, and she was the woman who really originated this whole idea of the multiple textures on barro negro, which is the Mexican pottery that is the black finish. She was the one who figured out that if you sanded and buffed it and then refired it, you could make objects that had both the matte and the gloss coloration on the same object. And so it really made things pop. Lots of other potters in Mexico, some of whom are considered more collectible than her, followed in her suit. I think it's a little bit overlooked because she was the one who came up with the idea back in the 1950s to do this. This piece is 1970s. There's the inscribed signature Doña Rosa Wach for Oaxaca, Mexico on the bottom. I just thought it was a really neat piece, and I felt like the people who bid on this really understood what they were getting. It got 12 bids, and it sold for $58, which was a little bit more than I expected because, again, I think Doña Rosa is not as valued as she should be considering how important she was to this sort of wear. So to me, this was the first time I've seen one of these pieces really sell for a price that I thought was appropriate for the kind of wear it was, and I'm so glad that it's going to one of my favorite collectors out there. And this also went to a viewer and is a wonderful piece, and this viewer is, these are friends of mine, and they are really into music and obscure music, and they bought the Circus Maximus, this psychedelic era 1967 album. It's in great condition in the original cellophane. The best part was this was one item I didn't have to ship. I was actually able to just hand it to them, and so that's a great thing too, because then you know that it got there and there is no breakage, and it saved them a little bit of money as well. It went for $9.99, which was the opening bid. They had one famous song called "The Wind," but they also had one of their musicians ended up writing Mr. Bojangles the next year and was more of a country rock guy than a psychedelic or jazz rock person like the rest of this band. That's why they only did one album. They didn't really see eye to eye musically. Because of all these different factors, this is an interesting, although rather obscure album. So I was glad to be able to find this. This actually did come from the same storage locker as the Ricky Nelson and the Beatles, because this was the woman who, in her young days, was interested in all of this stuff. Jerry Jeff Walker, that's the name of the fellow. He did the guitars and the vocals. He was the one who wrote Mr. Bojangles the next year, and that was his biggest hit. And so these folks being real music fans and music buffs, I think that this is a perfect thing for them to get. There was one other item that sold, and that was the Jeanette Glass Children's Cherry Blossom set from the 1930s in the original box, and it went for $88 plus shipping. eBay sent me a notice saying that that had not been paid and that they had canceled the transaction. I have to say, I have this happen with eBay about every 2 to 3 months, and half the time it's problems on eBay's end where the person tries to pay and for whatever reason they can't seem to get it to process. So make sure your stuff's all current. Make sure that if you are an eBay bidder that you have all the stuff on file and that your bids are working and that you're getting your notifications, because this has happened often enough now that I'm seeing this as a trend with eBay. And by the way, if you are the person who bought that set and the transaction was canceled and you still want the set, please do reach out and email me at theantiquenomad@gmail.com and we will get that arranged for you. I had one situation where we had to put it up again and let the person bid on it again because they just could not get eBay to process their payment. So, eBay is not always a perfect place. It doesn't always work exactly right. And of course, there's human error on our part too. So when things like that happen, always reach out to the seller and say, hey, wait a minute, I really was serious about this. And things can be fixed. With that, I guess I will say thank you so much for watching, and thank you again to the Level 2 and Level 3 members. Your membership, the extra money that you give to the channel, really does help us. We have so much travel expense now. Shipping has gone up. Everything has gotten more expensive. So we are really grateful for your extra contributions. And in turn, we're really glad to be able to let you have first access to these things. But we are also really happy to have eBay so that we can ultimately share these with everybody in the world and let all the collectors have a chance at them. We will have another group of listings coming up very soon because we had to wait on the April ones until May. So we will have our regular May listings coming. So watch for that if you're a level 2 or 3 member. Thanks for everything, and we'll see you again soon.
If you enjoyed this video, check out this one. Also, click thumbs up to like this video and check the description for information about our Patreon, our memberships. We've got a lot of different levels with different perks and bonus videos and early content. Also, please do check out our website, theantiquenomad.com, for appraisal help. And we'll see you again for more adventures in the antique and vintage community soon. Bye for now.